This is CBN NewsWatch.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch for this Friday, June 26th. I'm George Thomas. Just as many Americans are getting back to their daily routines, a number of states are seeing a spike in coronavirus cases. CBN's Jennifer Wishan reports now there are concerns a rise in the death rate could follow.
With states like Texas and Florida posting record numbers of new cases this week, health officials warn Americans to continue taking precautions. Unlike the early months of the pandemic, the majority of new cases are in younger people under the age of 45. Most people who die from the virus are over age 80. But the fear is asymptomatic young people will pass it to older Americans.
Usually when we see a spike in positive cases, 2 weeks later, we often see an increase in hospitalizations. 4 weeks later is when we see a jump in deaths.
And the CDC estimates that 20 million Americans have been infected, roughly 10 times as many as have been confirmed. Texas reported more than 17,000 new cases in the last 3 days and a record of nearly 5,000 hospitalizations. Governor Greg Abbott is now pausing the Lone Star State's reopening and halting elective surgeries in the state's biggest counties. Florida is in a similar situation, reporting more than 114,000 cases total. But Governor Ron DeSantis says part of the uptick is due to increased testing.
This is mass testing regardless of symptoms.
Wearing masks inside businesses is only mandatory in a handful of states, but health experts say they're a necessary tool for containing the spread of COVID. A new model from the University of Washington suggests wearing masks could save as many as 33,000 lives by autumn. But in new hotspots like Arizona, Texas, and Florida, resistance to masks is heating up.
Are you going to allow the government to tell you you have to wear a mask?
It's our bodies, it's our choice whether we're going to wear them, not wear them. You guys are overstepping your boundaries 100%.
For some reason, masks have become political, but the research is clear and overwhelming. Masks prevent transmission by 50%. So the overwhelming message is if you go out and you can't social distance, wear a mask.
Jennifer Wishan, CBN News.
Thank you, Jennifer. Christianity may very well become the next target of the culture and cancel wars. The Washington Examiner reports Christian figures and symbols have increasingly become the subject of debate as protesters across the country demand a reckoning on racial justice, pulling down statues and criticizing controversial figures along the way. The Examiner went on to report protesters gathered outside St. John's Episcopal Church near the White House recently. Some with Black Lives Matters believe Christianity's complicated history with racism calls for its statues to be pulled down or to take over churches. The latest findings on human trafficking around the world is out. The Trafficking in Persons, or TIP, report was released by the State Department this week. Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey, who helped form some of the nation's human trafficking laws some 20 years ago, says it's a tough but fair report. He says China continues to own the worst human trafficking rating of major nations in the world, scoring a Tier 3. Hong Kong, increasingly under the thumb of the Chinese government, is almost as bad, landing on the Tier 2 watch list. The White House is still undecided after days of high-level meetings over whether or not to back an Israeli annexation plan. The Jewish state would annex parts of biblical Judea and Samaria known as the West Bank. U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, will continue discussions back in Israel on mapping out the exact area for annexation as laid out in President Trump's peace plan. The UN Secretary General called on Israel to abandon the plan. In Israel, many of those who would be affected say they want more information.
If implemented, annexation would constitute the most serious violation of international law, grievously harm the prospect of a two-state solution, and undercut the possibilities of a renewal of negotiations.
If the only way of Israel applying sovereignty over this area is a creation of a terrorist state in the land of Israel, we are against applying the law over this area. However, if this is not part of a creation of a terrorist state, so we're definitely for it, and we hope Israel is going to go ahead with it.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu set July 1st as the earliest date that he might bring the issue to the Knesset for a vote. Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem joins us now with more. Chris, after 3 days of meetings, the White House, they haven't decided to go along with Israel by its July 1st deadline. What do you think is behind the delay?
Well, George, I think there's many sides vying for attention for the White House, and also within the administration as well, there might be some division. First of all, regional players are against this. The UAE, the Arab League, has come against it. In particular, Jordan's King Abdullah has come against it. He said it's unacceptable. I know he's concerned about what will happen to his kingdom. There was a letter just written by 181 Democrats that are against it. On the other side, there was a letter by 100 Republicans who said they are for it. Many evangelical Christians are for it because they want Israel to reclaim its historical biblical land. On the other hand, some evangelicals are saying, well, we do want that, but you can't divide God's land, and you really can't pave the way for a Palestinian state. That's what many leaders in Judea and Samaria are saying. They say, we love the idea of 30% of the West Bank being declared sovereign Israeli territory, but they're very concerned about the other 70% that could turn into a Palestinian Authority terrorist state. And then as well, George, you also have internal Israeli politics. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is really pushing this, but his alternate prime minister is sort of putting the brakes on it. So there's a lot to weigh in the balance of the White House. That's why U.S. Secretary David Friedman, our ambassador, is coming back here to continue to work on the plan.
Yeah. Chris, the UN Secretary General and many others say declaring sovereignty would violate international law. But is there another view?
Very much so, George. And if you have to go back 100 years to the 1920 San Remo Conference, when actually after World War I, the great powers at that time divided up the Middle East. And actually, they had Iraq, they had Syria, Lebanon. So Israel has the same legal right, according to the San Remo resolution that was ratified by the League of Nations, as Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. They petitioned a homeland for the Jewish people. As I said, it was ratified by the League of Nations in 1922, never abrogated by the United Nations. So when the UN General Secretary or others say this violates international law, there's really an international law that is the basis of what the modern Middle East is all about. And I think that's what many people here in Israel are turning to, that 1920 San Remo resolution that actually had a homeland for the Jewish people.
Yeah. Chris, tell us what many in Israel are saying about what the Bible says about the Holy Land.
You know, just earlier today, we talked to one of the Jewish leaders in Judea and Samaria. He's head of the Shomron Council. And he said, you know, this is God's land. It's really not even the Jewish people's land, according to the Bible. This is God's land. They look back to Genesis 12, when Abraham was walking in the promised land. He was at a place called Elon Moreh. This is where there was the tree of Moreh right there. And that's where God promised Abraham the land of Israel. So that's where they look back to. And that's how many of the people, Jewish people in Judea and Samaria, look to the Bible as the source of their right to Judea and Samaria.
Chris, you have a show on the CBN News Channel called Jerusalem Dateline. Tell us quickly, what do you have coming up on this week's program?
Well, we have more on annexation and this idea of sovereignty over parts of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. We have a unique interview, George, with a man named George Deek. He's the first Christian ambassador for Israel. And believe it or not, his first posting is going to be to a Muslim nation, Azerbaijan. We also have a story on Shiloh, the ancient capital of Israel. It's actually digging into the Bible. And finally, we have a segment on our Facebook Lives. We've been going around Jerusalem for the last few months, having Facebook Lives. We want to tell people about that and hope they can tune into our Facebook page and see what's happening in daily life here in Jerusalem and around Israel.
All right, terrific. My man, Chris Mitchell in Jerusalem. Chris, thank you so much. And by the way, you can catch Chris's handsome face and all of his expertise from the Middle East. You can catch it right here with his team tonight on the CBN News Channel at 9:30 Eastern. All right, folks, coming up, some activists are making life difficult for some Americans who are just trying to live their lives around the protests. What happened when one driver called 911 for help? That story in a moment.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Welcome back to the broadcast. Activists and protesters are making life difficult for commuters in some cases. They are blocking streets, roads, and major highway access to some cities. Our Mark Martin talked with Todd Starnes about one man's simple attempt to get home in the midst of the chaos.
Todd, before we talk about what is happening with some protests in cities across the nation, let's take a listen to what happened in Columbus, Ohio recently to one man.
So all I'm trying to do is get home from work. I worked all day. That's all I'm asking.
That's all we asking for. Would you please turn around and let us protest in peace?
That's a protest. They're riding their motorcycles, possibly wheelings, and
yep. We were told by our mayor to stand down. So the mayor has given them full reins of the street.
Tell us what's happening there.
Well, it really was a shocking scene in Columbus, Ohio. Like many other cities around the country, a lot of motorists have been having trouble getting from point A to point B. And the reason why is that many of these streets have been commandeered by protesters. Now, by and large, these protesters do not have permits. And in many cities, you are required to have a permit if you're going to march in the streets, if you're going to block the right of way. Well, there were a lot of motorists in the Columbus, Ohio area that were caught up in one of these protests, and they are not peaceful, contrary to what you may be hearing on the news. These are not peaceful protests. And in the case of Columbus, Ohio, the protesters were congregating around cars. They were banging on the windows. They were threatening motorists, trying to pull motorists out of their cars. And when one of the guys called 911 for help, the 911 operator flat out told the driver, "Sir, you're pretty much on your own here because the mayor has told the police department to stand down." Now imagine being a motorist. You've got some lunatic standing on the hood of your car, and the 911 operator is saying, "Yeah, well, there's not much we can do here. Sorry, good luck to you."
Have these protesters gone too far when someone can't even drive safely on the streets?
Well, this is a pretty disturbing situation because, again, in some cases, for example, Memphis, Tennessee, you had motorists who were caught up in these random, spontaneous protests, and they nudged protesters, or they moved their car through the protesters, and they were charged with crimes. They were charged with attacking these protesters. So it really is tough if you are a driver that is caught up in one of these. What do? Do you let these protesters destroy your car and pull your family out and beat them to a pulp? Or do you do what any reasonable person would do, which is try to drive through these protesters who, by the way, should not be on the streets anyway?
Why do you think so many city leaders, Todd, are giving these often violent protesters reign of the streets, as that dispatcher mentioned?
Well, this is a disturbing situation across America, where basically these blue state governors, blue state mayors are capitulating to the protesters. It's almost as if they are handing over the reins of the city to these lawless thugs. And we have seen this time and time again. It's happening in Seattle in real time. It's happened in places like Portland, Oregon. These folks have been terrorized by Antifa protesters for years. And yet the mayors and the governors seem to think that by appeasing these protesters, that they're not going to have their cities burned to the ground. And that simply has proven not to be true, as we have seen crime skyrocket in places where the police have been told to stand down, places like New York City and Chicago, for example.
Is this taking us into a dangerous place beyond peaceful protests, into lawlessness being okay in America?
Yeah, this is the big issue here. Where do you draw the line? Here's what I have to say about that. If you want to have a protest, that's your constitutional right. But your constitutional rights do not give you the right to block traffic. If you want to protest, do it in front of City Hall, do it on a public sidewalk, but you don't have the right to interfere with traffic. And another very disturbing story out of Atlanta, Georgia, in front of that Wendy's that was burned to the ground with that horrible police shooting a couple of weeks ago. That is on a major thoroughfare that leads people directly to the interstate. Well, over the weekend, a couple of motorists were stopped. They were told that they could not use this roadway because of the color of their skin. There were armed black men stopping motorists. The people in the car happened to be white motorists who, by the way, happened to support Black Lives Matter, but they were told they were not welcome to drive on that public street because of their skin color.
All right, Todd Starnes, thanks for bringing us this story.
Thank you.
Still ahead, navigating the current culture and calls for change as NASCAR racers and fans return to the tracks. That story in a moment.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
And ministering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to CBNNewsChannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Welcome back to the broadcast. One area of American life not only altered by the pandemic, but also by social justice protests is the world of sports. Here to talk about what's happening in NASCAR and other sports is our very own sports guy, Sean Brown. Sean, always good to see you, my man. Hey, there's some disturbing news earlier this week of a noose left in NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace's garage at Talladega, Alabama. What's the latest on that one?
Hi, good morning, George. Yes, on Sunday, the 21st, I believe, it was someone found what looked like a noose in Bubba Wallace's garage. And NASCAR issued a statement that drivers received either Sunday night or Monday morning that an investigation was going to be conducted because it resembled a noose. The FBI found, or they concluded, that it wasn't a noose and that whatever it was there. It actually was a pull down. They called it a pull down. So that they can reach the garage doors and pull them down, but they resemble a noose. And what the FBI concluded is that it had been there since October, and apparently you can find the pull down or noose in just about every garage at the Talladega Speedway. And so that's it does look like a noose. If you've seen the picture, it does resemble a noose. I can see why someone would think that, but apparently, they concluded that it had been there since October, and it was in fact a pull down.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. That's good news to hear. Confederate flags, as you know, have long been part of NASCAR, but they've been banned now. You recently had a chance to talk with driver Michael McDowell about the changes in NASCAR culture. Tell us what he said.
Yeah, Michael is a good friend, a solid man of faith. And in fact, he gave me my first tour of NASCAR years ago, just kind of showing me around. And he said, look, the culture is definitely changing. I mean, he looks at them as a family. It's a family atmosphere amongst the drivers and crew members. And so, right for years, NASCAR was at one time the largest spectator sport, in the country. Those numbers have been declining lately. And so I'm really glad that he's, just kind of affirming that the culture is changing. You could see that after the overwhelming response that Bubba Wallace received once they thought that it was a noose that was hanging in his garage. I mean, all the drivers, all of the crew chiefs, crew members, all kind of walked with him. I believe it was before the race, just showing their support for his cause and fight against racial inequality and fight for just fight for justice. And you can see the overwhelming support, people walking with him and just really just loving on him and just saying, hey, you're not alone in this. It sends the message that racism has no place in NASCAR. And Michael just kind of affirmed that. He's a believer, and so he has a personal approach. Here's a quick bite just from our interview. Take a look at that.
There is good and there is evil, and we know that both exist. And it's tough, for me as a Christian, I don't want to alienate anybody from the racetrack, and I don't want to alienate any of our new fans or our previous fans. But at the same time, there needs to be a change of heart too, and so I feel like the only one that changes the heart is God. And so, it's leading people in that towards him that is going to make the difference.
And see right there, you see Mike, he said, look, it has to be a heart change, man. And only God can really do that. Yeah. But they're definitely headed in that direction. And it's just good to see. Yeah.
Real quickly, last few seconds, switching gears to America's favorite pastime, Major League Baseball is opening up, right?
Baseball is coming back, man. They've agreed to 60 games. It's going to be mostly divisional. They've obviously, taken a lot of precautions and safety precautions, partnering with health professionals. But baseball is coming back, man. It's going to look a little different. But baseball will be back as early as July 23rd. They can report to training camp or spring training as early as July 1st. But the 23rd, 24th, baseball is back, brother.
That's awesome. Sean Brown, my brother from another mother. My man, he's got a show on the CBN News Channel. You can catch it right here. And I actually catch more of Sean's interview with racer Michael McDowell on Going the Distance this weekend on the CBN News Channel. Coming up, the results of a huge prayer effort in one of the nation's well-known cities and what pastors say they are trusting God to do.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
Welcome back to the broadcast. We Pray San Diego is a prayer movement in the city among multiple churches seeking God for their community and nation amidst all the trials brought on by the pandemic and civil unrest. Well, they had a huge rally last weekend. Miles McPherson, senior pastor of San Diego's Rock Church, says there was a huge turnout. A total of 135 churches participated, with almost 16,000 people turning out on sidewalks, at parks and other public places simply to pray for their city. McPherson says between the pandemic and the protests in the city, like many across the nation, well, it has been hit very hard. People could be seen in 7 different prayer sites, bowing their heads and lifting their hands in prayer, crying out to God for their city. McPherson says he believes that they are going to see the fruit of this prayer effort in the days and weeks to come across the city in people's lives and hearts. Many city leaders, including a U.S. representative, congressmen, county supervisors, mayors, and council members also attended, and another 8,600 people joined online through social media. Fantastic. Well, folks, that's it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime online at cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing us at newswatch@cbn.com, or you can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. From all of us here from the headquarters of the Christian Broadcasting Network in Virginia Beach, Virginia, we wish you a fantastic Friday, a safe weekend ahead. And from all of us, goodbye and God bless.